All right, we're going to start today's meeting of the Artist Tradition Bearers and Coastal Issues Working Group. Our speaker today is Pippin Frisbie Calder. She's going to be talking about environmental printmaking. So, and just want to say that her prints and installations have been shown widely around New Orleans, most prominently at a solo show at the New Orleans Contemporary Arts Center. She has also exhibited across the US and internationally in Canada and Indonesia. She has held artist residencies locally at the Joan Mitchell Center and a studio in the woods, in Florida at Big Cypress National Preserve, and in Haiti with the Jacmel Expression. She received her MFA in printmaking from Tulane University in 2017 and her BFA with honors from Rhode Island School of Design in 2008. So welcome, Pippin.
Thank you. Thank you. And then do you mind pulling up that PowerPoint?
I can start sharing that and we can roll from there.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, thanks for having me, y'all. I really appreciate it. And it was nice to have a little chat before we jumped in too. So I am a printmaker. I primarily create work about the ecosystem of the Gulf South, and I work a lot with biologists and scientists who conduct research in those areas to try to make work that is really kind of illuminating about our local ecosystems. And you can go to the next slide. Just a little placeholder depending on the as a printmaker, I mostly do woodcut and silkscreen. I've also done etching and litho, but primarily I do woodcut and silkscreen. And so what's here is an image of me carving one of my blocks. And the idea is I remove the surface of the block of wood. Whatever I take away will turn into the white of the paper, and whatever I leave will pick up ink. I roll ink on top of it and will turn into these lines. Go to the next one.
Show the video or no?
Oh no, I think it's okay. It's loud.
Okay.
And then thank you though. So here I am rolling ink across one of these woodcuts that I was describing. So once I've carved away the surface, basically like a large stamp, I use these big rollers to apply ink to the surface of that. And then this is a etching press at Tulane University. And I place the paper on top and then use the press to create a nice, even, direct pressure that gets applied to the ink surface of the block. And on the left-hand side, here I am etching it's etched into glass, and I'm inking the surface of that. So next one, please. And so I moved here in 2010. I was born in Hammond, but my family kind of bounced around a lot. And so I officially moved back to the South in 2010, right with the BP oil spill. And I had been making kind of all kinds of different work that was vaguely environmental, but the sort of difference in the narrative arc around the national telling of what was happening here versus the lived experience of a lot of my friends and community around, what people knew about getting sick from exposure to the oil, the loss of industry that was affecting people on all sorts of levels. And so that really motivated me artistically. I was spending a lot of time with Scott Eustace, who's the wetland specialist for Healthy Gulf, and we would go out canoeing almost every weekend. And through him, I learned a lot about the sort of the damage that was being done to our local ecosystems, and kind of who was responsible for that and how, and identifying healthier versus not as healthy ecosystems. And it kind of sparked this interest in me that on how do we communicate that through art and help with kind of exposing some of these ideas and issues to the more national audience, but with the knowledge coming from the actual place where the work and the ecosystems are being made or exist. Next slide. And so this group is probably familiar with this image, but it's our kind of coastal land loss. We were just talking about that before this meeting, and how we are losing land at a really astronomical rate. I think it's about one football field every 100 minutes. And we're losing land faster than almost anywhere else in the world. And so going out and kind of exploring these areas, you could kind of see that in action. But also you need a boat to get to a lot of these areas, or you need to drive for several hours. And so again, I was thinking of how to make work that could bring this sort of these ideas and these issues into galleries and contemporary art settings there, where people maybe didn't know as much about them as folks living in these areas or with access to boats. Um, Next slide, please. And so here's some of the work that came out of those interests. I was going out, like I said, canoeing a lot with Scott Eustace and taking images, like photographs, while I was out in these ecosystems, and trying to capture kind of the beauty and the density of a healthy ecosystem through woodcut. And so these are all collaged images from different trips that I've drawn onto a block of wood and then carved in reverse into those blocks of wood, and then inked, like you saw with the cypress in that initial image, and printed. And then once they're printed, I watercolor them. And they're quite large, 37 by 52. So again, trying to capture the swamp as much at scale as I could do with this medium to impress upon people why these spaces need to be cared for and why we should love them in my own way, I guess. Next one. And also I was really captivated again through spending a lot of time with these biologist friends of mine by these stories of kind of unusual successes in restoring ecosystems and species. And so the whooping crane is a great story. The bird itself is about 5'5". I'm 5'5". So and I've seen them in up close at the Species Survival Center on the West Bank. They're huge birds. We were down to, I think, 14 in North America. And then through a lot of concerted environmental interest and citizen scientists, they've managed to bring the population back, I think into the 800s, I think, and now there's a lot of them breeding in the wild. And they did that through these sort of unusual techniques of dressing up as these birds with these artificial bird heads to keep the birds from imprinting on the humans that were breeding these birds in captivity and then releasing them into the wild. And then also flying with these ultralight planes to retrain the traditional migratory path. And so I wanted to try to capture that story in woodcut. And then also I made this costume because I was like, this is just too good to be, it's weirder than reality, or reality is weirder than myth, is really what this sort of felt like. And it worked. I mean, these birds are coming back. Okay, next one. And then here are some more examples of these woodcuts. This is from Maurepas Swamp, which I just love on the left. The great white egret in the cypress swamp. And then on the right is that cypress block that you could see me printing in the earlier images at Tulane. And this is what it looks like once it's been printed and painted. And that one's about 7 feet tall. So it's a large block print. And again, trying to capture the kind of, again, a cypress tree is obviously much larger than this, but trying to create a sense of the grandiose in the woodcut to the best of my ability. Next one, please. And so I had in 2014, I was able to do the residency through a Studio in the Woods, which is an environmental residency program here in New Orleans. And I worked with Dr. Timothy McLean, who is a microbiologist out of Tulane. we devised this project where we would go out with these phytoplankton nets into what we deemed to be healthy and unhealthy ecosystems, collect water samples, take them back to Tulane and Nicholls State University. This is Gary LaFleur on the upper left here, or the right slide, upper left. And then process these water samples through a centrifuge and then look at them through the microscope. And it was amazing what we found, because I don't come from a scientific background, and the results were almost immediately conclusive about whether or not it was healthy or not. In areas like Jean Lafitte, or areas where it looked like a healthy ecosystem, there would be a broad diversity of microorganisms in these very small samples. And in other areas where there was a lot of industry and a lot of evident pollution around us, we would sometimes only identify 2 or 3 organisms. So it was sort of stunning how easy it was to be able to see this evidence in our water, as well as visually. Next slide, please. And we wanted to figure out how we could kind of, again, communicate that to the New Orleans audience, because that was where we did our exhibit. And so we did it at the Tigerman Den, which is a little local venue. And I created this series of silkscreen illustrations based off of the organisms we had found. And so on the upper right, you can see my illustrations, and in the middle and the bottom, you can see some of the images that we took from the microscopes of what we were looking at. And we wanted to identify both the form and the species to the best of our ability, but then also it's with a microscope, you can switch and kind of put into the chloroplast view, and you can see where the organisms are photosynthesizing and processing nutrients into food. And so we went back in and painted the silkscreen prints with glow-in-the-dark paint where the chloroplasts were, so that people could walk around the gallery using UV lights and activate the images themselves, as sort of a way of kind of engaging people with these ideas of, and also the functionality of the microscopes. And then we also had the GPS coordinates of where the organisms had been located, so that people could identify which water bodies where that we had collected these samples in. Thanks. All right, next slide. And here's another kind of way of, I was playing with these ideas again of this sort of the in and out of the microscope, and how to kind of capture the magic of what it is to see our world in the microscopic. Because I mean, the organisms would be spinning around with their flagella, and like, I mean, it was just like I mean, they're fascinating and beautiful and highly energetic under the scope. And so trying to capture that as much as we could into fine art and kind of present that. And we also had the scopes on site at the opening, so people could look around and actually like see the organisms, and that was projected on the wall so people could see what people were seeing as well as a shared experience. Okay, next one. And then similarly thinking about going back to kind of the macro of the swamp rather than the micro in those instances, other species that we could kind of latch on to, like the ivory-billed woodpecker, to have these conversations about what we've lost here in Louisiana, as a way of thinking about what we can do to preserve what we still have. Next slide. And I created, I don't know if there's a way to, oh, sorry, go back one. It's a video. Again, we might, do you mind silencing it? We can play it, but maybe mute it if possible. Thank you. I should have muted them all before. But thank you, Mark. So this is a video of the installation at the Contemporary Art Center in the Oval Room. I created thousands of hand-carved, hand-printed ivory-billed woodpeckers that were on paper and then mounted onto magnets and onto nails on the wall, with specimen tags kind of identifying when they were shot, using dates along the range of their lifetime, as well as sort of incriminating comments about our extractive nature. And then also names for the bird, like the Lord God bird or the ghost bird. And as people participated in the exhibit, taking birds off the wall, which they were encouraged to do, and filled out a little questionnaire I called a hunting license, like an artificial hunting license. Gradually, the room emptied and the species went extinct. So it was a way of creating a miniature extinction in a sort of a fast scale or a fast tempo. Do you mind going to the next slide? So here you can sort of see it at the UICA in Grand Rapids, Michigan again. And also when you take a bird, you remove the shadow alongside it. Next slide, please. And so you can see it here from the above view. And a lot of them did get taken at the CAC, and all of them at the UICA got taken. We had actually 2 rounds of extinction, with more than 900 people participating in the exhibit. And in one case, we'd let it sit empty for a day before restocking. And, people would come and they'd be like, I came to get my bird. And it's like, well, you missed it. They're all gone. Like, what can you take from that, and sort of trying to get people to think about our role in our environments and what we can be doing in our small ways as well as larger national roles to help preserve what we still have here. Next slide. And this is, again, people could read the labels. This is once they're mostly gone. Next slide. I'm going to speed it up a little because I realize I'm going a little slow. And we wanted it to be a participatory for all ages. And so a lot of kids engaged with this exhibit. And I heard some amazing conversations about kids and their parents trying to kind of understand the difference between extinction and endangered. Next slide. And that's it when it's about to be gone. And then again, I did the same idea. Canceled edition refers to once you finished an edition, like a woodcut edition, you say 1 out of 30, then you destroy the block. So you're canceling the block and you're canceling the edition. So applying that to species extinction and also the materiality I'm using to create these images. This was silkscreen, again, at the CAC. Next slide. And there were these informational pamphlets that everyone could read that gave little examples of why these birds were beautiful and special, where they migrated, and also how many layers to the silkscreen print. And then the information that in the next 30 to 60 years, more than half the bird species in North America will struggle to survive due to human-caused habitat loss and global warming. And I did this with Dr. Donata Henry and Dr. Jennifer Colson, 2 ornithologists that I have a great amount of respect for. So we did this as a collaborative installation. Next slide. And here you can sort of see the components of the installation and how I make them. Next slide. And this is a video of the layers to the cedar waxwing to give a sense of the process. Again, trying to make each bird a piece of art so that when people leave with them, they're precious, they're treasured, they keep them, they put them on the refrigerator or somewhere in their home. And then the stories they can tell about the exhibit then enter their personal lives and personal spaces in the hope that engaging conversations around our environment can happen outside of the gallery. And that's the print. And then they get laser cut out and then put on magnets. So it's a labor of love, each print, each bird. Next slide. Here you can see again the layers. And this is just in one of the birds, and I would make hundreds, if not thousands, depending on the installation. Next. And then some of the birds. Next. How much should I speed this up? How are y'all feeling? We're up keep going?
Yeah, I know you have several projects having looked at your website, so it's kind of leave it up to you how many you want to cram in.
Well, then we'll just kind of go through these ones really quickly then, because I have quite a, yeah. So this is the Mockingbird project I did with another biologist, Dr. Jordan Karubian, and also his wife, Hanata Karubian. Next slide. We worked together to create a 16-foot mockingbird float and got a lot of volunteers where they were all given components to make their own mockingbird outfits. And we also, during those sort of stitching and sewing crafting sessions, talked about the research around mockingbirds here in New Orleans that the Caribbean Lab does, researching lead in the bird species around the urban centers of New Orleans, and how lead affects mockingbirds, and similar to humans, it creates increased aggression, and there were other issues with kind of the lead. And so talking about kind of adding that into the conversation of Mardi Gras and the beads that we get every year that end up in the soil and our catchment basins, which a lot of them actually have lead paint on them. And so we already have issues with lead in New Orleans, and then these beads are contributing to more and more lead in our system. Next slide. And oh, sorry, go back, I apologize. Getting people to give us their beads to recycle in exchange for a handmade throw that had information about Caribbean Lab that they could learn about lead in our city and the Mockingbird Project. So a way to have fun, but also contribute to the environmental success of our city. Okay, next slide. And so I get a lot of I go out in my John boat and I take images through my scope. So I get most of my imagery. Next slide. And it can be messy. Next slide. And then some of this newer work that I've been making with the scopes is sort of, again, thinking about like a microscope, but again, the circular nature of collecting imagery through a scope or binoculars, and then creating work about, in this case, bald eagles, which were, I think we had 4 nesting pairs here in Louisiana in the 70s due to DDT. And with the banning of DDT through a lot of environmental pressure and Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, they've rebounded. And now we see bald eagles almost everywhere, right? When we drive around. But that's within, since the 70s that they've come back. And really, I've only really started seeing an abundance of them in the last 5 or so years. And so I think it's an important thing currently to think about these sort of the whooping crane and the bald eagle as we struggle, especially with younger people. I'm an educator as well, to communicate why it is important to take action on these issues. I think people can get overwhelmed and be like, I'm just going to sit back and see what happens. Like, what can I do? But there are all these stories of just a few people telling these really important stories and getting a movement behind them, and then preserving species and having these pretty profound success stories. You know, that alligator here is another one, the brown pelican. And I think that it can be, at least personally, I think creating large scale art about these stories and then using the gallery and museums as a platform can be a way of engaging people in ideas of stewardship and conservation. So that's my personal goals in life. But anyways, I'll stop there because I've gone over and I have so much art. But we can do some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pippin. Yes, quite prolific. So,
Could definitely keep hearing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Well, and I always time myself, but then I try to slow down when I'm actually in the presentation. And then I was like, well, nope, still more art than we can get to. But I have a show at the O'Keeffe Museum, July 19th, for anybody who wants to see this work in person. And these pieces behind me will be in that show.
Awesome. We love taking a drive.
So fun. I'm going on Thursday for one of the openings.
Cool. I really appreciate, the phrase that stood out to me when you were talking about the whooping crane and like the unusual successes. And then you kind of came back to that in your final statements about, you know, the individuals who have like a wild idea and then decide to materialize it and actualize it, and whether it's through a creative project or, you know, their scientific approach. But yeah, putting the unusual idea into action and then having the success is very inspiring.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the scientists I work with are doing all this profound work, but it gets sort of stuck within the silo of the scientific community.
Yeah.
And so I feel really fortunate that a lot of these biologists are willing to work with me, and in the hope that we can sort of get these stories out to a bigger audience to kind of demystify some of the science and also draw attention to this like really great work that is happening around us that just gets lost in scientific journals because it's impossible to read those things. Like,
Yeah. Art and science definitely need each other.
yeah. And also, there's not a lot of rules to art where there's a lot of rules to science. And I'm always working with these biologists who are like, wait, you can just do that? And I'm like, yeah, we can do whatever we want, you know? So,
A revelation.
Yeah, I thought the it just exhibits where you have people, they could take something home, you know, and then it wasn't there anymore. It was at their house. Yeah,
Mhm.
and you totally, the way you explained it was also the way it hit me was that, you know, it's something special. It's one of a kind. You made it yourself by hand. And then afterwards, I learned that you also like destroy the things, the, you know, the silk screens, right? After it's because it's
Wow.
canceled. So that's even more precious an object. And they can then better relate that to the
Oh yeah.
preciousness of the birds themselves, right? Those
That's
living things out there somewhere that maybe they haven't seen themselves, but they at least have this beautiful image of it.
exactly. And then with the migratory birds piece, the idea is they're all birds that you can find in your backyard here in Louisiana if you look hard. And so hopefully maybe people go out with their kids and like try to find some of these birds, or maybe they have a relationship through their grandparents to some of these. And so also just trying to activate our external spaces, be like, oh, you can access all of this like without a boat in this case, because some of the other stuff that I'm talking about you need, you know, more equipment to get to. But our backyard birds they're there, you know, and they're disappearing really rapidly. So yeah, it's fun with all these biologists because they come and they like I heard ours talk where Dr. Jennifer Colson brought in a great horned owl to the artist talk. You know, it's like stuff that
Wow.
only biologists can do. And just watching all these like middle-aged women and elderly women on the North Shore who are just like very, like just had all these like really articulated questions and like really knew what, you know, knew their ecosystem. And then just everybody just like fell apart when the great horned owl came out. It's like, oh my gosh, you know? So like disrupting what, you know, you think you're going to something and then you're like, you can take something, you can see an owl, you know, you know what's
Yeah.
gonna
That
happen.
really brought the wow factor to it.
I had a great interaction with the ivory-bill woodpecker one of the kids that came to the show. Yeah, I sort of briefly talked about, spent like 45 minutes with his aunt in the video room, again, just like really trying to understand the distinction between extinct and endangered, and like bringing up all these examples of like dinosaurs and things like that. And she's like, no, that's on television. Like that's not, you know, real. And just this sort of, I felt so lucky they didn't realize that I was the artist, just getting to sit there and listen to this sort of moment as this kid had this really hard kind of relationship with what that means. It was very motivating. So I think art can help again with, especially with younger audiences, and like um, getting people to be able to have these conversations, because the younger people can start thinking about this or feel like they have any kind of power to influence it. I think that's going to be what we need.
Yeah.
A lot
You
of
have to
it.
have like the personal experiences to take away and like really embody the emotion of it to understand the importance sometimes. And you can really feel that through art. And that the canceled edition work reminds me of this song by Levon Helm on like one of his later, solo records, and it's called Golden Bird. And it's like, it makes me cry every single time. And it sounds like a traditional song. I don't know if I have to look into whether it's basically a story about, a person, a hunter that goes out and sees like the most beautiful glowing creature that he's ever seen, and the beauty was so enchanting that he needed to have it for himself, and and then shoots it down, keeps it, and extinguishes that light. And then later in the song, the figure, like, I guess a human form, like, comes to him in a dream and says, you know it like sums it up, like, you put out this light because you wanted to keep it for yourself.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's the big moral of it, like that extractive mentality, being so overcome by the beauty of something but wanting to keep it, um like ends up killing it and disappearing that from the face of the earth. So I recommend listening to that if you
I
want to
wrote it down.
cry.
Yeah.
But
I
it
had
really,
one teenager. Oh, sorry.
yeah, that's
He took a bird, he filled out the form. It was like, it's a $5 kind of ask to kind of help with the cost of things. And so put that in the slot, took a bird and then moved it. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, what are you doing? You like took a bird and moved it. And he was like, I decided I don't need it. And he was like, ah, and it was like only one person out of the like hundreds and hundreds of people who have participated in my installations, but I got to see
wow.
that, which was really cool.
Yeah.
I was like, ah, I love you. You're gonna go on to do great things.
It reminded me too of
That's
the recent
amazing.
Ken Burns documentary about the buffalo. I don't know if
I
you've
should
seen
watch
that.
that. I've heard
But,
about it.
but there's this whole uh,
I
part of the
haven't seen
history
it.
where the buffalo is almost going extinct, and there are these hunters that are like want to go out and shoot the last one. They want to be the one
Mhm.
to shoot the last one, so they can, I guess, have the hide or put the head on their wall or something. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
wish we were
this
past that, but someone just killed
strange human
him.
nature thing.
Yep. Yeah. I follow the LA whooping cranes on Instagram. Awesome Instagram if you're on Instagram.
Yeah.
But yeah,
How
someone
do
just
we get
killed
them?
one of the birds, and there's like they're
And
huge. A whooping
that
crane
keeps happening
is-
too.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
was not the first. How
Yeah.
how do we get how do we change the culture, or how do you get the word out enough,
Mhm.
you know,
And the
to some
biocultural collaborative is about culture. It's about the people factor. There aren't too many, images of humans in your work. There's a couple. There's the one with the whooping cranes, which is
Mhm.
great. And there's also one we didn't see today, a Marie of Land and Sea.
Yeah, that's
Could you
Melissa.
talk about that?
Yeah. That piece is, I don't unfortunately, but it's a picture of her with the fishing nets all around her and a shrimp boat on her shirt and then pelicans flying. And that's, yeah, it's sort of I worked with her on that. Again, I like to work collaboratively, as you can see. And so we worked together to kind of try to tell the story of growing up in Chauvin with the all of the fishing and growing all of your food and kind of the cultural relationship and community of what that is, and kind of how that becomes a part of who you are, and not something that and so when we think about land loss, we're not really talking about it as this like cultural loss, which I'm so glad you brought it up at the beginning of this meeting, because that is what's happening. It's like people are losing culture and identity, and oh, thank you. And so the idea behind this was actually to kind of do a similar thing to Canceled Edition, where I would create this block, print it and had the print on the wall and then like carve away her in a public setting and actually like destroy the block in front of people as a
Mm.
way of visually communicating land loss. But we never were able to create the venue that I was like, I don't want to destroy this block for like one person and the mouse that comes across the floor an hour later, you know? So I think at some point we still want to do that. I want to do a whole series of women who are doing work around the environment that are doing it like her in kind of creative ways. She's doing Mosquito Supper Club and writes cooking books about coastal cuisine and the cuisine of her grandmothers and her aunts, and then using that to tell the story of what's happening here and around land loss and culture loss. I also want to work with my good friend Dr. Donata Henry and do the migratory birds and like with all of the birds that are disappearing all around her. I want to do one with Sharon Levine from Rise St. James. And again, I'm not quite sure what she would want that to be of, but at some point I want to get back to doing this series, but I got a lot of things I want to work on.
Yeah. Also, I know, I guess the other question I had was about, you know, the way your images show mostly healthy ecosystems or, you know, creatures in a healthy environment, as opposed to that photo you showed of the oiled bird
Mhm.
at one point. So could you talk about the decision to do it that way and how you're trying to make a difference with that strategy?
Yeah, I know. I always struggle with that because a lot of the stuff I want to talk about is the stuff that's hard, but then the art I want to make is actually just celebrating it. And really it just comes down to I just love these ecosystems and I want to depict them as I want to see them, not destroyed. But I have wondered if they're more effective if I draw them in these degraded ways. And in some ways, this new series is sort of playing with that because in the past, I've normally focused on species that are native to Louisiana, and more I'm shifting into just sort of depicting what I see and how I see it. And so, like the ones behind me are of this golf course that has really great, or the one here at least of this golf course that has this like great rookery in it, and it's got all these kind of mixture of native and non-native plants that are in it because it's next to a golf course. And so but yeah, it's I'm never quite sure like if there's always that challenge of if I did it where it's all these. I mean, I almost did this for the Oreo O'Keefe show. I thought about building a glass house and just having the whole floor covered in dead birds as a comment on bird strikes. But then ultimately I decided to make these paintings that are celebrating what we have. So I don't know. I guess I just really love a healthy, beautiful ecosystem, and that's ultimately what I gravitate towards creating. Um,
I
but
like
yeah.
the idea of putting the intention out there, like you're focusing your energy on the health of it. But then there's also the part of you capturing it while it's beautiful. And there's like, we don't want to feel, but there is that like impending doom feeling sometimes where if, it might not look that way one day, but you're creating future tributes in
Mhm.
another way. But that's hopefully not the case. But in the event
Right. And
that we can't save all those football fields, obviously they're disappearing, it's still an homage to yeah, the beauty of all of it.
thank you. Yeah, and I've had a few people who, like this one environmentalist I love working with, she had said that she had like moved away and she works for Audubon, but she lives here in New Orleans, and she's from New Orleans. And she told me that part of what made her want to move back was my art. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like so touching. So I think there is a way to sort of be like, okay, it's beautiful and that people need to want to save these places. And I think we've got to fall in love with things before we're going to fight for them. So I guess that's kind of where I come from. But
It strikes me also that the images are not by them, are not enough by themselves necessarily. So it's the stories that go with them, like the birds that those people take home from the canceled edition. They've got this beautiful thing that they took home, but they also have a story that they can tell any dinner guest to come over about it.
exactly.
Well, and that's a real-time experience of the devastation too. It's like I also saw those as um like a harvested collection, like how naturalists and scientists for so many years, I mean, and still do have to collect to study. That always seemed like heartbreaking to me, to see all of these like pinned creatures in boxes and jars and things like that. So it also felt like you can see like the sterile nature of that kind of process. And yeah, those are like extracted from the environment. It's just like they're just like a specimen that then disappears.
Yeah. And that's still happening. I didn't actually realize that, but yeah, that's still the practice. I was hanging out with biologists in Ecuador, and he was like, "This is so hard. This is the worst part of my job. I'm going out and I'm shooting all these birds." I was like, why are we still doing that? Like, isn't there a way, not do that? But still happening. Yeah, I know it's crazy, but yeah, I mean, that was the idea, is that it's the specimen drawer with the ivory-billed woodpecker. And yeah, which,
So, and there's also like always a question of, how do we know if we're reaching people? And yeah, I mean, you've already kind of answered that question by talking about the various interactions you've had with people at exhibitions and so on. But is there any other ways that you've been able to tell that your work is hitting hitting a chord, striking a chord?
yeah, I have, so it's not as much part of this practice, but I also do work, like I do print posters and stuff for different environmental groups and like Rise St. James and stuff. And I've seen evidence of, not just myself, but other artists, that when you have visuals at these environmental protests, that it's more likely to end up in sort of in big news, because they like to attribute, like if there's a good graphic to go with the story, they're more likely to write about it. And so I think that, and again, not like, I've had a couple instances where that's happened, but I've also just seen that in so many other people who are doing that. So for me, that's an exciting way to kind of, again, make this stuff have more of an immediate, maybe, participatory role in change. And then just having my work in so many homes is really nice. Like I go into, because the nice thing about the takeaway bird is that they're intentionally inexpensive and easy to mount. And so almost everyone I know has at least one piece of my art in their house, which, at least for me personally, feels amazing.
Pretty
And
cool.
then, and I think being part of the New Orleans, it's also another way to engage with community. I think there's a lot of people in New Orleans who are making amazing artwork, and to be a part of that, it feels important. And then lastly, I get a lot of times if people see a bird, they text me like, "I saw this bird, I thought of you," which is just like, I'm so glad that when you see a bird, I'm the first thing that you think of. So I don't know that I'm like, actually, I wish I could say that like something I did is like actually help create a preserve or something. I can't say that. One day I would love to, but in small ways, I think that it shows up.
Have you gotten hired to do work for any particular movements or projects or
I
like
normally
that?
work for free when it's a movement I like. So the problem with good movements is they often are broke.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Fair enough. Gotcha.
But I've done a lot of work for different movements.
I'm a musician. I should know better than to ask a question like that.
But I do sell at Jazz Fest, and I have a couple galleries, and I actually am very fortunate that also the work that I want to make is also marketable. So I'm entirely self-employed, other than I do some teaching with Tulane, but for the most part, I make a living off my art, which also feels I'm just so grateful for that.
Beautiful. Well,
Mhm.
keep it up.
Yes.
Come
Any other
visit
questions for our guest
anytime.
before I turn the recording off? If not,
Do you have a
I'll
question, June? Are you sincere?
go for it, June. She's got it.
I love it. It's beautiful. And you're capturing, what we're losing day by day. But beautiful, beautiful work.
Thank you.
Love to see it in person one of these days. But gorgeous. Yes, thank you.
Well, my studio's in Araby for anyone who wants to visit. I'm always here. And then also the June 19th show to see a lot of my work in one place.
And that
And
again
you
is going to be where?
The O'Keefe Museum in Biloxi.
Okay.
and you
Wait, that was June or July?
Oh, thank you. July 19th. Thank you.
I had
But
written
and-
down July. We're gonna come see.